my entire political career. And I don't believe that I have the answers to everything, and it's my way or the highway. But I'm not going to breach a basic principle that would weaken the presidency, change our democracy, and do great damage to ordinary people, just in order to go along with what the House Republicans are talking about. Okay.
I did ask specifically about China, and I'm wondering whether, to what extent has our loss their gain?
You know, I'm sure the Chinese don't mind that I'm not there right now, in the sense that, you know, there are areas where we have differences, and they can present their point of view and not get as much of pushback as if I were there, although Secretary of State Kerry is there, and I'm sure he's doing a great job. But I've also said that our cooperation with China is not a zero-sum game. There are a lot of areas where the Chinese and us agree. On trade in particular, though, here's an area where part of what we're trying to do is raise standards for example, intellectual property protection, which sometimes is a big problem in China. And if we can get a trade deal with all the other countries in Asia that says you got to protect people's intellectual property, that'll help us in our negotiations with China. Richard McGregor.
Up here.
There you go, Rick.
Yeah, can I go back to the issue of debt prioritization?
Yeah.
What are your legal liabilities in here? What is your legal advice? That foreign creditors must be paid first, particularly as it's a sovereign credit issue? Or
Richard, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to let Jack Lew, the Secretary of the Treasury, make a formal presentation on Thursday before the Senate committee, because this is obviously sensitive enough, and I think people would be paying close enough attention that details count. And I think prepared remarks from Secretary Lew on that topic would probably be more appropriate. But as I indicated before, we plan for every contingency. So obviously, you know, worst case scenario, there are things that we will try to do. But I will repeat, I don't think any option is good.
Mr. President.
Stephen Dennis.
Mr. President, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about budget process. In the past, you've negotiated along with the debt ceiling with the Blue Dogs, for instance, in 2009, 2010, along with the debt ceiling increase then, pay-as-you-go reform. You named a fiscal commission. The Republicans today are talking about let's have maybe another committee that would work out our differences over the next few weeks. Is that something that you could talk about on the side, something that wouldn't necessarily be a concession, but something that could be a format for getting a deal done?
Yeah, here's the thing, Stephen. I know that Speaker Boehner has talked about setting up some new process or some new super committee or what have you. You know, the leaders up in Congress, they can work through whatever processes they want. But the bottom line is either you're having good faith negotiations in which there's good give and take, or you're not. Now, there is already a process in place called the budget committees that could come together right now. Democrats have been asking for 19 months to bring them together, make a determination how much should the government be spending next year. The appropriations committees could go through the list, and here's how much we're going to be spending for defense, and here's how much we're going to be spending for education. And that's a process that's worked reasonably well for the last 50 years. I don't know that we need to set up a new committee for a process like that to move forward. What has changed, or what seems to be motivating the idea we have to have a new process, is Speaker Boehner, or at least some faction of the Republicans in the House and maybe some in the Senate, are holding out for a negotiation in theory, but in fact, basically Democrats give a lot of concessions to Republicans. Republicans don't give anything. And then that's dubbed as compromise. And the reason that Democrats have to give is because they're worried that the government's going to stay shut down or the U.S. government's going to default. And again, that you can dress it up any way you want. If that's the theory that the Republicans are going forward with, then it's not going to work. So let me just give you one specific example. I've heard, at least, and I can't confirm this, that one of the ideas of this new committee is you could talk about reductions in discretionary spending. You could talk about entitlement reform and reductions in mandatory spending. You could talk about how long you'd extend the debt ceiling, but you couldn't talk about closing corporate loopholes that aren't benefiting ordinary folks economically, and potentially, if you closed them, would allow us to pay for things like better education for kids. Well, you know, I don't know why Democrats right now would agree to a format that takes off the table all the things they care about and is confined to the things that the Republicans care about. So, again, I don't know that that's exactly what's being proposed. My simple point is this. I think Democrats in the Senate and the House are prepared to talk about anything. I'm prepared to talk about anything. They can design whatever formats they want. What is not fair and will not result in an actual deal is ransom taking or hostage taking, and the expectation that Democrats are paying ransom or providing concessions for the mere act of reopening the government or paying our bills. Those are not things that you do for me, and they're not things that you do for the Democrats.
But is there a room here where it's not necessarily a concession, where it is you would negotiate what the negotiations are going to look like? You don't have to agree to overturn Obamacare, but you can actually negotiate what the talks are going to look like so everybody's comfortable. And you know, you mentioned yourself, this is a tough vote for all these House Republicans. Yeah. You're asking them to take a very tough vote for the debt ceiling. Usually people in both parties want to have some cover, something that they can point to and say,
which is
hey,
fine.
I want some budget process reform
before
I approve another $1 trillion in debt.
Which is fine. And so if they want to do that, reopen the government, extend the debt ceiling. If they can't do it for a long time, do it for the period of time in which these negotiations are taking place. Why is it that we've got hundreds of thousands of people who aren't working right now in order for what you just described to occur? That doesn't make any sense. The Small Business Administration gives out $1 billion worth of loans every month to small businesses all across the country. That's not happening right now. So there are small businesses in every state that are counting on a loan to get their business going, and you've got the party of small business saying Small Business Administration can't do it. That's what they call themselves. And yet, they're suffering. You've got farmers who are waiting for loans right now. Those loans cannot be processed. The Republican Party says the party that looks out for farmers. I happen to disagree. I think farmers done real good under my administration, but having said that, why would you keep the government shut down and those farmers not getting their loans while we're having the discussions that you just talked about? You know, the Republicans say they're very concerned about drilling. They say Obama's been restricting oil production, despite the fact that oil production is at its highest levels that it's been in years and is continuing to zoom up. But they say, you know, the Democrats are holding back oil production in this country. Well, you know, one of the things that happens when the government's shut down is new drilling permits aren't processed. So why would the Republicans say to the folks who are interested in drilling for oil, sorry, we can't let those things be processed until we have some negotiations and we have some cover to do what we're supposed to be doing anyway? That doesn't make sense. If there's a way to solve this, it has to include reopening the government and saying America's not going to default, it's going to pay our bills. They can attach some process to that that gives them some certainty that, in fact, the things they're concerned about will be topics of negotiation. if my word's not good enough, but I've told them I'm happy to talk about it. But if they want to specify all the items that they think need to be topic of conversation, happy to do it. They want to say, you know, part of that process is we're going to go through line by line all the aspects of the president's health care plan that we don't like, and we want the president to answer for those things. I'm happy to sit down with them for as many hours as they want. I won't let them gut a law that is going to make sure tens of millions of people actually get health care, but I'm happy to talk about it. All right? Stephen Collins. I'm just going through my list, guys. Talk to Jay.
The operations in Africa this weekend suggest that the continent is now the central front in the campaign against terrorism. And if we're going to see U.S. military operations all around the continent, how does that square with your contention that America cannot be at war forever?
Well, you know, if you look at the speech I gave at the National Defense College several months ago, I outlined how I saw the shift in terrorism around the world and what we have to do to respond to it. And part of what I said is that we had decimated core al-Qaeda that had been operating primarily between Afghanistan and Pakistan. But you now had these regional groups, some of which are explicitly tied to al-Qaeda or that ideology, some of which are more localized. Few of them have the ability to project beyond their borders, but they can do a lot of damage inside their borders. And Africa is one of the places where, because in some cases the lack of capacity on the part of the governments, in some cases because it is easier for folks to hide out in vast terrains that are sparsely populated, that you're seeing some of these groups gather. And we're going to have to continue to go after them. But there's a difference between us going after terrorists who are plotting directly to do damage to the United States and us being involved in wars. You know, the risks of terrorism and terrorist networks are going to continue for some time to come. We've got to have a long-term plan that is not just military-based. We've got to engage in a war of ideas in the region and engage with Muslim countries and try to isolate radical elements that are doing more damage to Muslims than they're doing to anybody else. We've got to think about economic development, because although there's not a direct correlation between terrorism and the economy, there's no doubt that if you've got a lot of unemployed, uneducated young men in societies, that there's a greater likelihood that terrorist recruits are available. But where you've got active plots and active networks, we're going to go after them. We prefer partnering with countries where this is taking place, wherever we can, and we want to build up their capacity, but we're not going to farm out our defense. And I have to say, by the way, the operations that took place both in Libya and Somalia were examples of the extraordinary skill and dedication and talent of our men and women in armed forces. They do their jobs extremely well, with great precision, at great risk to themselves. And I think they're pretty good examples for how those of us here in Washington should operate as well. Okay.
Mr. President, we talk about that. Did the capture of Mr. Libby comply with international law?
We know that Mr. al-Libby planned and helped to execute plots that killed hundreds of people, a whole lot of Americans. And we have strong evidence of that. And he will be brought to justice. Mark Knoller.
Mr. President, while you're waiting for the shutdown to end, why is it that you can't go along with any of the bills the House is passing, funding the FDA and FEMA, where you were yesterday, and veterans benefits and Head Start? You've got to be tempted to sign those bills and get funding to those programs that you support.
Of course I'm tempted, because you'd like to think that you could solve at least some of the problem if you